Okay, so I thought I would start by talking about some of the good things that socialists and communists have done around the women's question. So socialists and communists during and since Marx's life have continued to give prominence to the women's question, which is, as it is known in Marxist theory and in practice. The socialist governments in the Soviet Union, China, and Cuba, for example, placed gender equality at the top of their agenda the minute that the revolutions happened, doing away with laws that discriminated against women. In the Soviet Union, women gained the right to abortion on demand, which, is something that is still being fought for here in the U.S. In China, the People's Revolution put an end to foot binding, wife selling, illiteracy, drug addiction, and sex work, all of which had made Chinese women before the revolution among the most oppressed in the world. And Cuba, to this day, continues to advance the rights of women and LGBTQ people. Cuba was recently named the only Latin American country to rank in the top 20 in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report for 2011, which is a major accomplishment. And they also, I went to Cuba in, I think, 2006, and we got to meet with the CENESEX organization, the Center for Sexual Education, and they are actively going out into communities in Cuba and trying to educate people about LGBTQ oppression and trying to, dispel the myths about, of homophobia and transphobia. And they provide free gender reassignment surgeries for trans people, which is something that certainly is not happen here in the U.S. and certainly doesn't happen in a lot of countries around the world. In 1986, Sam Marcy, a founder and chairperson of Workers' World Party, wrote about what he called the feminization of labor in his book, High Tech, Low Pay. And I believe we have copies of that book in the back if folks want to check that out. Anyways, he described how the pauperization of labor, the increase in low-pay jobs, and the decrease in jobs that paid living, sustainable wages had made it imperative that women work, and had resulted in a vast increase in the number of women working outside of the home. And I say working outside of the home because let's not forget that women do plenty of unpaid work inside the home. Now, of course, the fact that women are working outside the home isn't a problem at all. We would never suggest that. But the problem is that women were and are pushed into the lowest paying jobs. They're subjected to the worst kinds of exploitation and subjected to deplorable working conditions. Of course, it's still the case that women make an average 70 cents to every dollar that men make, even when women attain those higher paying jobs and do the same work as men do. The feminization of labor that Marcy was speaking about is actually a continuation of policy since the very beginning of capitalist industrialization. Marx noted that with the introduction of machines, the beginning of the economic shift to capitalism, capital, quote, confiscated the mother of the family and usurped the labor that was necessary for consumption within the family. Now again, the problem isn't that women were in the workforce. The problem is that now women were being expected to complete 2 shifts. We just said that women do plenty of work at home, and so that didn't change when women ended up in the workplaces. So they would have 1 shift on the job, and then they would come home to what was called a 2nd shift at home. I shouldn't say it in past tense because it's present too. After the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, the Soviet government attempted to correct this situation by setting up communal eating places, laundries, and childcare to begin the process of changing women's fundamental role in society. So Marcy explained that it is the objective processes of capitalist production, accelerated, as we have seen, by the great changes introduced by the scientific technological revolution, that are responsible for the significant pauperization of the workforce. So Marcy wrote that in 1986. Today, of course, we are seeing the problems women face intensify under the capitalist economic crisis, a crisis that, of course, is forced on the working people by the changes that Marcy mentioned back then, in which machines replace workers and more workers are paid less and less. Of course, we know that inherently the economic crisis hurts the most oppressed the hardest. That's, it doesn't really take a whole lot of thinking to figure that one out, but let's put some numbers behind it. So the National Women's Law Center reports that since the start of the so-called recovery in the United States, women have regained only 19% of the jobs they lost during the recession. While women represented just over half of the public workforce at the end of the recession, at 57%, they lost 67% of the jobs that were lost in the public sector between June 2009 and April 2012. In the private sector, women have gained only 26% of the jobs that were created over the course of the recovery. Meanwhile, the right wing has gone on the offensive against women, attempting to pass laws in states throughout the country that would deny women the right to control their own bodies and make their own reproductive decisions. Tied to this are attacks on providers of health services for women, such as Planned Parenthood. Social services from food stamps to welfare benefits and public schools are being slashed left and right with no concern for the women who will suffer and starve as a result. And that's just a sampling of the attacks on women. We could talk about, the rape culture in the society. We could talk about a number of other attacks on women that happen on a daily basis, but that's just for this brief amount of time, that's just a very small snapshot. So what might Marx say about the current situation for women? Well, he might say something along the lines of what he wrote in a 1968 letter, in which he stated that, quote, "Everyone who knows anything of history also knows that the great social revolutions are impossible without the feminine ferment. Social progress," Marx said, "may be measured precisely by the social position of the fair sex." And, we hope that he'd have changed some of his language by 2012. We wouldn't be talking about the fairer sex and stuff like that. But the essence of what he is saying is still there. In the International Workingmen's Association, during Marx's time, Marx nominated Madame Law to the International's highest body, the General Council. Marx also encouraged a young woman, Elizabeth Dmitrieva, to go to Paris and to organize the women's section of the International there. Dmitrieva became a leading figure and was responsible for socialist formulations on behalf of it's in French, so I don't know how to say it, but it's the Union des Femmes, I guess, or something like that. I was reading this paper by this Marxist scholar named Paresh Chattopadhyay. Sorry, I'm pronouncing everything bad today. But anyways, he asserts that this last action, the encouraging of the women to form the women's group in the International, that it really shows how much Marx valued the necessity of the existence of women's independent organization to defend their specific rights. Now, we agree wholeheartedly with Marx on that respect. Workers' World Party members are instrumental organizers with the Women's Fightback Network, which engages in struggles for women's rights from reproductive to economic justice, from an end to imperialist wars that, obviously have a devastating effect on women around the world, to an end to anti-immigrant raids and deportations to separate families. And, we're always quick to raise that those families were often initially separated in their homelands by policies like the U.S.-imposed North American Free Trade Agreement. So we're involved in that. Marx might also agree with Sam Marcy's words in High Tech, Low Pay. Marcy argued that the changing character of the working class will lead to more working class consciousness. So this is Marcy. He said, "When we speak of the women's movement or the anti-war movement or the black movement as part of the working class movement, it doesn't mean they won't have an independent class character, but they will be part of the working class movement because it will have come alive as the fundamental class in society, which alone can weld these movements together in a genuine anti-capitalist and progressive struggle, a struggle for both democratic rights and for socialism." Okay, so I just want to tag that last bit about the struggle for democratic rights and for socialism, because you might ask, why did Marx and why do we see socialism as essential for women's rights? Well, Marx and especially Engels explained that the subjugation of women was the first building block of an economic system based on private property. When surplus value or wealth came into existence due to advances in the domestication of animals, women were relegated to a second-class status, and indeed to the property of men, in an attempt by the men to preserve that wealth. The oppression of LGBTQ people also stems from this rise in the patriarchal system, as the existence of LGBTQ folks challenged attempts to justify this new system as natural and as normal. So, knowing this history, again, in very brief, gives us a hint to the correct way to wage struggle against women's oppression. In a pamphlet entitled Feminism and Marxism in the 90s, Comrade Naomi Cohen writes that the state in any society is a state of the ruling class. It serves to protect the rights and property of the tiny majority who own everything. This ruling class looks upon the workers and oppress both women and men as their property to be exploited, I'll be done in 2 seconds, to be exploited and discarded at will. Only by destroying the state of the ruling class and building an alternate state based on the needs of the vast majority of humanity can women lay the basis for fundamental change in their condition. So, we fight for women's and LGBTQ rights on a daily basis because it's essential to our survival, but at the same time, we always connect it to the broader working class struggle and the struggle for socialism. The women's and LGBTQ struggles aren't incidental or secondary to the working class struggle. They're an integral component of that struggle. And I think that Marx would definitely, if he were here today, would definitely agree. So, thank you.